If you are enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. The highway stretched out in front of Jack like an endless ribbon of cracked asphalt, weaving through the darkened hills and sprawling farmlands. His truck's headlights cut through the thick, inky night, casting sharp beams across the empty road ahead. It was quiet out here. Too quiet. Jack had been driving for almost 18 hours straight, the hum of the truck's engine the only sound accompanying him. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, but even that effort was starting to feel like it required too much energy. He could feel the weight of his eyelids slowly sinking, his body screaming for rest, but he couldn't afford to stop. Not yet. The miles had to be covered. The load needed to be delivered, and a seasoned trucker like him didn't let exhaustion get the better of him. At least that's what he told himself. The radio had long since gone silent, static replacing whatever weak station had been playing earlier. The only sounds now were the steady hum of the tires against the pavement and the low rumble of the engine. Jack's stomach growled, reminding him that he hadn't eaten since lunch, maybe longer. The last real meal he had was at a truck stop diner in Kansas a lifetime ago. The memory of greasy diner food and stale coffee seemed like a distant dream now. His fingers drummed against the steering wheel absent-mindedly as he glanced out of the windshield. A few miles down the road, the glow of the dashboard illuminated a flicker of green light, an exit sign, and something caught his eye. A faded, almost illegible blue and white road sign. Rest stop, 5 miles. Jack's eyes narrowed. The sign was barely hanging on its post, as if it had been put up decades ago and left to decay in the relentless wind. Still, he didn't care. A break was just what he needed. The long stretches of deserted highway had begun to wear on him, making the world outside feel like it was closing in. He turned the steering wheel, taking the exit without a second thought. The road beneath his truck shifted from smooth highway to a rougher gravel path. Jack's headlights flickered over a sparse stretch of land that looked almost barren. In the distance, the silhouette of a small rest stop appeared. Dim lights, from a single neon sign glowing faintly in the distance. Better be open, Jack muttered to himself as the truck rumbled down the winding road. It felt like something out of a bad movie. A lone truck stop in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place that wasn't on anyone's itinerary. He could have kept going another hour or so, but the prospect of food, a restroom, and a quick stretch of his legs was too appealing to pass up. The truck's engine echoed against the walls of the hills as he approached. The rest stop was small, tucked between 2 craggy outcroppings of rock. There was a single diner, a gas station, and a few weathered, cracked benches. The neon lights above the diner's windows were glowing faintly, the open sign flickering like it was fighting to stay alive. Yet, there was an unmistakable silence that hung in the air, thick as fog. As Jack parked the truck, the parking lot seemed completely deserted. No other trucks, no cars, nothing. The lot was paved in places, but parts of it were cracked and chipped. The whole place felt like it had been forgotten by time. He killed the engine, the truck's rumble dying down with a heavy sigh. For a moment, Jack sat in the stillness of the cab, the only sound now the occasional creak of the truck's metal frame cooling off. He turned his head and stared at the dark, empty lot. Probably closed for the night, he muttered to himself, his voice echoing back at him. But hunger gnawed at him and his legs were sore from the long hours behind the wheel. He pulled himself out of the truck and stretched, wincing as his muscles protested the sudden movement. The air was crisp, fresh with the cool bite of night. He shoved his hands into the pockets of his jacket, his boots crunching against the gravel as he walked toward the diner. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and the dim light inside cast shadows across the room. The air was stale, filled with the faint smell of old grease and something else, a musty scent, almost like mildew. He squinted against the gloom. The diner was small, but it had that classic truck stop look. Faded booths with vinyl seats, a counter with bar stools, and an old jukebox in the corner that wasn't playing any music. Jack's boots echoed in the silence as he made his way to the counter. There was a glass display case beside it, holding piles of old untouched donuts and a few stale sandwiches, their wrappers curling at the edges. He raised an eyebrow and looked around. The diner was empty. No waitstaff, no patrons. The tables and booths were all empty, but they were set as though they had just been used. Plates with half-eaten meals, coffee cups that were half full. It looked like it had been abandoned, yet still functional. "Hello?" Jack called out, his voice carrying in the strange stillness. There was no answer. The silence stretched on for a long moment. Jack leaned against the counter, the wood groaning under his weight. He glanced around again, but it didn't seem like anyone was around. He thought about turning around and leaving, but the thought of driving another few hours without taking a break made his eyelids heavy again. He sighed and sat down on one of the stools, running a hand over his face. The long haul was taking its toll and he needed food. From the back, a door creaked open, and a woman appeared. Her face was pale and drawn, but her expression was calm, too calm. She wore a faded waitress uniform, her hair pulled into a tight bun. Her eyes were heavy-lidded, as though she hadn't slept in years, and her movements were slow, almost mechanical. "Can I help you, hon?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet but distant, like she was reading from a script. Jack blinked. Yeah. Coffee, please. And a burger if you've got one. I've been on the road for a while." The waitress gave him a small smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You look like you could use a good meal. I'll bring it right out for you." Jack nodded, his fingers drumming on the counter as she disappeared into the back. He glanced around again. No one else had entered. There was no sound except the low hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The hairs on the back of his neck began to rise, but he shook off the feeling. Probably just the lack of sleep, he muttered to himself. He stared at the jukebox in the corner, its glass panels cracked and smeared. It didn't look like it had been used in years, yet it still hummed with a faint static, as though waiting for something. The entire place had that odd, stuck-in-time feeling. After what felt like an eternity, the waitress returned, sliding a cup of coffee in front of him and a greasy plate of food. The burger was stacked high with pickles, onions, and a thick patty, dripping with sauce. It looked fresh, but something about it was off. The bread was almost too soft, like it had just been pulled from the oven, yet the edges of the lettuce were wilted. He glanced at the woman as she set the food in front of him. "Thanks," Jack said, lifting the coffee to his lips. The moment the hot liquid touched his tongue, he frowned. It was bitter, strangely so. It tasted like old coffee, but it was hot. "Are you the only one here?" Jack asked, a slight unease creeping into his voice. The waitress didn't respond immediately. She stood there staring at him blankly for a long moment. Finally, she gave a small mechanical smile. "There are others, hon. They don't come around much." Jack's stomach churned a little. Something was definitely off. He glanced around again, feeling the oppressive quiet settling deeper into the pit of his stomach. "Right," he muttered, taking a bite of the burger. It was cold. Jack's eyes flicked around the room, his mind still working over the strange, stilted conversation with the waitress. He took another sip of the coffee, which tasted even worse now that he had time to think about it. Burnt, stale, and almost metallic. But he wasn't here to judge the coffee. He was here to rest, to eat, and to get back on the road, that's all. Nothing more. But that feeling of unease wouldn't leave. He pushed the thought aside and took a bite of the burger, chewing slowly. The meat was surprisingly tender, but something felt wrong about it. His mind tried to shake off the nagging sense that everything about this place was a little too perfect. The food, the quiet, the way the waitress moved. There was something too mechanical about all of it. As Jack chewed, he glanced down at the plate. The lettuce wilted in a way that suggested it had been sitting out for hours, maybe days. The edges of the tomato were curling, and the pickles were so perfectly uniform it almost looked fake. He took another sip of coffee to wash it down. The bitter taste lingered in his mouth as though the liquid had no intention of leaving. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, eyeing the diner around him once more. The jukebox in the corner crackled to life, playing a song that Jack didn't recognize, something slow, eerie, like a love song played on an old gramophone. The kind of song that you'd expect to hear in a forgotten movie, right before something went horribly wrong. The hairs on his arms stood up, but he couldn't stop himself from listening. It was a sweet tune, but there was a strange distortion in the sound. It wasn't exactly wrong, but it definitely wasn't right either. Jack shook his head. "Get it together, old man," he muttered under his breath. He looked up toward the door of the diner again, hoping for some kind of distraction. But the place remained as still as it had been when he first walked in. No one else had entered. No trucks, no cars parked outside, and the lot was eerily empty. There wasn't a sound in the air. Not a single footstep. It felt as though time itself had frozen. Then, without warning, the waitress returned, gliding through the door with unnerving silence. Jack wasn't sure if she had ever really left. She slid into the seat across from him without asking, her eyes locking with his in a gaze that felt colder than the air around them. "Is everything to your liking?" Her voice was the same, a syrupy sweetness that made his skin crawl. She didn't seem to have aged a day, not in the time he'd been here, and the smile on her face was too wide, almost as if it had been fixed there, frozen in place. "Yeah, it's good," Jack replied, forcing a smile, though he was more focused on the way she was staring at him. "A little off, though. Coffee's stale?" she interrupted, her voice soft, as if she already knew what he was going to say. Jack froze, his heart skipping a beat. "Yeah. How'd you—" She smiled again, but this time it was more of a grimace, like she was trying to hold something back. "Don't worry about the coffee, hun. We don't serve it for taste." Her tone dropped a fraction, almost imperceptible. "We serve it because you're here." Jack's mouth went dry. He tried to hide the discomfort growing in his chest. "I'm not sure I follow." "You're always here," she said, her eyes twinkling with something unreadable. "Everyone who comes through eventually stays." Jack felt a sudden shiver crawl down his spine. He swallowed hard, the burger sitting heavy in his stomach now. "What do you mean by that?" He stared at her, trying to piece together what was happening in this strange little diner. Something wasn't right. Maybe it hadn't been right since he first pulled off the highway. The waitress's eyes seemed to lose focus, like she was staring into the distance, somewhere far beyond him. "You'll see soon enough." Before Jack could respond, the diner door creaked open and a man walked in. Another customer, finally. Jack's eyes immediately fixed on him, but the stranger didn't seem to notice him at all. The man was wearing a faded jacket, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes bloodshot as though he hadn't slept in days. His shoes clicked softly on the linoleum floor as he shuffled over to one of the booths. The waitress didn't even glance in his direction. She just sat there, staring at Jack with that same frozen smile. Jack glanced over at the man in the booth, but his attention was stolen by something else, his own reflection. It was barely visible in the window of the diner, just a faint outline against the night. But what caught him off guard was how much he looked older in that reflection. His face was more drawn than he remembered, his eyes a little more tired, and his hair was graying faster than he'd expected. It wasn't just exhaustion. It was something deeper, something that didn't make sense. He wiped his hand across his face. He needed to get out of here. Jack pushed back from the counter, his chair scraping against the floor, the noise startling him for a second. "Look, I appreciate the food, but I've got to get going. I've got miles to cover." The waitress didn't move. She didn't even blink. Her eyes just stayed fixed on him, unwavering. "Of course, hun," she said in that same calm, distant voice. "But I think you'll find that it's not so easy to leave here. Not once you've crossed over." Jack's gut clenched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he felt his pulse quicken. He took a step toward the door but froze halfway across the room. The door was gone. The space where it had once been was now nothing but a blank wall. He turned around in confusion, but the window where he'd seen his reflection was gone, replaced with an empty gray wall as well. His pulse began to race. "Where's the door?" Jack asked, his voice shaking. His eyes darted around the diner. There had to be an exit. There was an exit. He had come in through it. The waitress tilted her head, her face unreadable. "The door is always where you last saw it," she said cryptically, "but it won't lead you where you want to go." Jack felt his breath catch in his throat. His palms began to sweat and his heart hammered in his chest. Something was very wrong here. His mind screamed at him to leave, but the room around him felt as if it was closing in. He tried the door anyway, it wouldn't budge. Jack's pulse thundered in his ears as he yanked desperately at the door handle. His fingers slipped and sweat began to bead on his forehead. The door was solid, unyielding, like a wall made of stone, and no matter how hard he tried, it wouldn't budge. He stepped back, eyes darting to the window, where the reflection of the night sky and the lonely highway should have been. But now there was nothing but a faint, opaque wall. Nothing at all. The strange, suffocating silence that filled the diner pressed on him from all sides, thicker than the stale air. It felt like the walls themselves were breathing, slowly closing in on him. Jack's mind was racing. Okay. Think. You're just tired. You need to sleep. Maybe you're hallucinating. Just a bad batch of coffee. That's all. His fingers trembled as they slid down to the surface of the counter, tracing the ridges of the worn wood. But the counter felt different, now. It wasn't smooth. There were deep grooves in the surface as though time itself had scratched its way into the place. The subtle shifting of the diner around him made everything feel off, as if he had stepped into a world that existed just outside of time. "Where's the door?" Jack demanded again, his voice sounding too loud in the stillness of the room. The waitress didn't move, her wide smile as frozen as ever. But her eyes were no longer distant, they were waiting. "Where is everyone?" Jack's voice cracked as he scanned the room. The man who had walked in earlier was now seated at his booth, his hands folded neatly in front of him. His face was locked in a calm expression, but Jack noticed something odd. His eyes didn't blink. His skin was pale, unnaturally so, and it appeared to be stretched taut over his face like a mask. No one moved. No one breathed. Not even the jukebox played anymore. The silence was oppressive. The waitress finally spoke, her voice soft as she stood up and took a step toward him, her shoes making no sound against the floor. "You haven't really left yet, have you?" Jack spun around, heart racing. "What the hell are you talking about?" The waitress didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked toward the other side of the counter, picking up an empty glass, cleaning it with a rag that looked as though it had seen years of use. She moved with slow, deliberate precision, as if she were part of the decor rather than a living person. "The door is always where you last saw it," she repeated, her voice eerily calm. "But it will never take you anywhere you want to go." "What?" Jack shook his head, his body trembling with frustration and confusion. "What's happening here? Why can't I leave?" The waitress stopped cleaning the glass and turned toward him. Her gaze was chilling, unwavering. "This place doesn't let people leave once they've found it. Once you've crossed through that threshold, you become a part of it." Jack's stomach dropped and he stumbled back a step, his head spinning. His eyes flicked back to the man at the booth. The figure remained motionless, but Jack couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The man's unblinking gaze felt as though it were boring into him, stripping him down to his core. "You're not real," Jack whispered, more to himself than anyone else. The waitress smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It wasn't even a kind smile. It was cold, it was predatory. "Oh, I'm real," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper now. "We all are. But you've been here before, haven't you? You just don't remember." The words hit Jack like a punch to the chest. His breath caught in his throat. No, I haven't. I've never been here before. This is insane." "Are you sure?" The waitress tilted her head. Her lips parted slightly as she spoke, and for a brief moment, Jack saw something behind her eyes, a flicker of something dark and unsettling. "What if I told you that you've been here for much longer than you think, that everyone who comes here stays forever?" No way." Jack backed away from her, his pulse racing. He turned toward the door again. "This is crazy. I'm leaving." But his feet wouldn't move. It was as if the ground beneath him had frozen, anchoring him to the spot. Leave. If you want, the waitress said, her voice gaining an almost amused tone. But you won't get far. You're already part of this place, Jack. Her words chilled him to the bone. His head spun as he turned around, his legs unsteady, his mind struggling to make sense of what was happening. He grabbed his keys from the counter, feeling his fingertips numbing against the metal, and rushed toward the door. He slammed his palm against the wood, once, twice, but it felt as if the surface had become too solid, as though the very air in the room was rejecting his efforts. Suddenly, a screech of metal echoed behind him. He spun around in time to see the man at the booth stand up. The man didn't move the way a person should. His legs were stiff, his body jerking unnaturally as he came toward Jack. His face, pale, almost ghostly, was locked in a grotesque smile that wasn't his. His eyes didn't blink, didn't shift. They remained locked on Jack like empty, hollow sockets. Jack's heart hammered. The man reached out for him, and Jack instinctively backed away. "What do you want?" Jack yelled, his voice breaking. But the man didn't answer. Instead, he continued to move forward with stiff, jerking movements like a puppet on strings. It was terrifying, unnatural, and for the first time, Jack felt true fear gnawing at his insides. "Leave me alone," Jack shouted. But the man didn't stop, and Jack could feel, deep in his gut, that something was horribly wrong. He turned and bolted for the back of the diner, his shoes clattering against the hard floor as he ran. He skidded to a stop at the hallway entrance. The walls were lined with old, yellowed wallpaper, cracked and peeling, and the hallway seemed to stretch forever, swallowed by darkness. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, flickering. It felt like the entire diner was holding its breath, waiting. But what was it waiting for? Jack glanced back over his shoulder. The man was still coming, slower now, his steps almost robotic. Jack's eyes darted to the back door of the diner. There was another exit. He had to make it. He ran toward the door, his hand outstretched to grab the knob, but it was locked. No. Jack's voice was ragged. He banged on the door, hoping for some miracle. "Let me out!" He whirled back around to the room, his breathing ragged. He could hear the man's footsteps behind him now, slow and measured, but relentless. "Please," Jack gasped, his mind spinning with panic. "What do you want from me?" The man was close now, just a few feet away. His face was frozen in that unnatural smile, his eyes empty. Empty like the diner, like the waitress, like this place. And for the first time, Jack realized something that made his stomach turn. He wasn't just trapped in the diner, he was trapped in time. This wasn't just a roadside stop, it was something else. It was a place outside of time, where people, souls, were drawn in, captured, and made to relive their last moments over and over. The faces of those who had wandered here before, now stuck forever in frozen expressions, spoke to him from the walls. The man at the booth, the waitress. They were all part of this. And now, Jack was too. Jack's heart slammed against his ribs as he backed away from the locked door, his palms slick with cold sweat. The man was right there, no more than 2 feet from him. His hollow, empty eyes stared into Jack's like a predator sizing up its prey. His lips stretched into that grotesque, frozen smile. There was no warmth in it, just the eerie certainty that he was about to be swallowed by whatever nightmare had claimed this place. Jack's breathing quickened. His fingers twitched toward the edges of the worn-out counter, desperate for something, anything to hold on to. He felt his stomach turn. The air around him was thick with tension, and it smelled faintly of mold and old grease. Everything in this place was wrong. The frozen man didn't move. He stood there staring. His eyes didn't blink. He didn't breathe, and the silence in the diner was suffocating. Jack snapped his head back toward the hallway, his last hope of escape, but there was nowhere to go. The hallway stretched into darkness, the flickering light at the end offering no comfort. His mind screamed at him to run, but his legs felt like lead. "Why won't you leave me alone?" Jack spat out, his voice shaking. The man didn't respond, of course. No one ever responded here. The waitress, the other patrons, the man at the booth. They were all silent, stuck in their unblinking stupor. He tried again to open the back door, his hands gripping the knob with desperation, but it didn't budge. The muffled sound of the jukebox turning on filled the silence, its distorted static breaking through the tension. And that's when Jack noticed something even more horrifying. The other faces. The people who had been sitting at the booths and tables before, the ones he hadn't paid much attention to. They hadn't moved either. The woman sitting in the corner booth, a middle-aged figure with messy hair and a worn leather jacket, was now staring at Jack. But there was something wrong with her eyes, something unsettling. They were blank. No life in them. Just wide, staring holes. And she wasn't blinking. Jack's breath caught in his throat as he turned to the man who had been seated across from the woman. He looked younger, probably in his 20s. His face was frozen in the same expression, the kind of smile you give when you're trying to pretend everything's okay, when you're trying to hide your fear. But Jack could see it now, the tension in his face, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the table, frozen mid-motion, like he had been trying to reach for something before he was caught. The woman, the man, the others, they weren't just silent. They were trapped. They were all trapped. "What the hell is going on here?" Jack whispered to no one in particular, his voice barely audible in the thick silence. But no one answered. The cold sweat that had been gathering on his forehead turned into a chill that sank into his bones. His hands were shaking now. Every inch of the diner seemed to be suffocating him, pressing in on him from every direction. The wallpaper peeled at the edges, like it was trying to peel away from the walls themselves. The flickering light in the hallway dimmed, then brightened again as if it were struggling to stay alive. Jack's eyes darted from the man in front of him to the other frozen faces scattered throughout the diner. It was like they were all waiting for something. No, someone. And it hit him like a cold slap. He was the someone. He was the one who had been drawn in. With a shaky breath, Jack forced himself to focus. He needed to get out. He needed to find some way to escape this place before it sucked him in completely. But then something strange happened. The jukebox started playing a song, a soft, eerie melody. It was an old tune, something from the 50s, and it seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the diner. The music filled the air like a fog, seeping into Jack's mind, clouding his thoughts. "I can't stay here," he thought. But even his own thoughts seemed to slow down, as though the very space around him was stretching out of time. The waitress moved again. But this time, she wasn't just cleaning glasses or wiping down counters. She stood still for a moment as if considering something, then slowly turned to face Jack, her expression softening. "You've been here before, Jack," she said, her voice barely a whisper, like a ghost brushing the air. "We all have." Jack's stomach twisted. "What the hell do you mean?" She took a small step forward, her movements unnaturally slow, like something was controlling her actions from a distance. "You didn't remember, did you?" she asked. Her smile was the same, unnerving, frozen. But her eyes were different. They weren't blank like the others. There was something in them, something familiar. Jack's heart skipped a beat. "No," he whispered. "No, I haven't been here, I haven't." The waitress tilted her head slightly, her smile widening just a fraction. "You have, Jack. We all have." And that's when it hit him. The waitress, the man at the booth, the other patrons. They weren't just stuck in time, they were lost in time. Every face in the diner, every soul that wandered through had gotten caught in this twisted loop. No one left. They couldn't leave. They had been drawn in, just like him. He thought of the road outside, of the highway that had led him here, the dark, endless stretch that seemed to go nowhere. Was it really just a road, or was it something else, something more like a portal, drawing people into this place? "You're all..." Jack's words caught in his throat. "You're all... dead?" The waitress shook her head, that unsettling smile still fixed on her face. "We're not dead, Jack. We're waiting." "For what?" Jack's voice broke, the fear clawing at his chest. "For you," she replied softly. We're all waiting for someone to help us break the cycle. Jack's legs felt weak beneath him. The walls of the diner seemed to close in. The faces of the frozen patrons all staring at him with unblinking eyes, their silent pleas hanging in the air. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The waitress took another step forward, her voice dropping even lower, almost a hiss. But no one ever comes. No one ever leaves. The music from the jukebox played on, but now it sounded like a funeral dirge. A slow, mournful tune that filled Jack with a deep, unshakable dread. Then how do I get out? Jack asked, his voice cracking. The waitress smiled, her eyes locking onto his, and for a fleeting second Jack thought he saw something in her gaze. A glimmer of pity. The diner had become suffocating. Every inch of it, every flicker of light, every creak of the floor seemed to press in on Jack, pulling him deeper into a place that shouldn't exist. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. But the more he thought, the more his thoughts tangled, like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces didn't fit. The waitress, this eerie, frozen woman, with a smile that was more a curse than a greeting, was standing just inches away now. Her pale face, her unblinking eyes, her words ringing in his ears, louder with every passing second. "You don't leave here, Jack. None of us leave." He stepped back, heart thudding in his chest. His legs were wobbly, his throat dry. His whole body felt wrong, like he was being slowly suffocated by the very air. He turned toward the door, his last lifeline, but the way out now seemed as distant as the fading light outside. "I'm not staying here," Jack muttered under his breath, his voice barely above a whisper. He forced his feet to move, but they felt like they were stuck in mud. The waitress didn't move. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes, those eyes, never left his. "You don't get it, do you, Jack?" Her voice was soft, but there was a sharpness to it now. "You're already part of it." Jack's hand grasped the doorknob again, his fingers cold and shaking, but when he turned it, the door didn't budge. Panic began to rise within him like a tidal wave. He pushed against it harder, again, and again, but it was as if the door was welded shut. The metal handle felt like it was alive, twisting in his hand, mocking him. The jukebox's mournful tune continued to play in the background, but now it felt like it was crawling under his skin, worming its way into his brain. The longer he stood there, the more it consumed him. "You're not getting out, Jack," the waitress said again, her voice strangely soothing now, almost like she was consoling him, as if she understood what he was going through. But Jack didn't want understanding. He wanted escape. "Why?" Jack choked out. "Why me? Why are you all stuck in this place?" The waitress took a step back, the air around her rippling like heat rising off the pavement. "It's not just us, Jack. It's anyone who comes through this place. We're all stuck in the same endless cycle, trapped between here and there." "Here and there?" Jack echoed, confused. She nodded. "This isn't just a rest stop. It's a place between worlds, a limbo. People pass through here, some by accident, some by choice. But once they enter, they can never leave. It's not about fate, it's about time. Time bends here, it loops, it traps." Jack staggered back, his head spinning. "But I was just passing through. I just stopped to get gas and food. I didn't ask for this." His voice broke, fear creeping in like a cold hand closing around his throat. "I know," the waitress said gently, her smile fading for the first time. "But once you step in, you're part of it. No one ever gets out. Not once they're here." Jack's breath came faster, the walls closing in on him. His mind raced, but the words weren't making sense. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be happening. But the more he thought about it, the more the pieces fell into place. The locked door, the frozen patrons, the endless loop of the jukebox song, and the look on the waitress's face. She had been here before, hadn't she? "Why don't you just let me go?" Jack pleaded. "I don't belong here. I just need to leave, please." The waitress's face softened with a hint of sadness, but her eyes, those empty, hollow eyes, remained unblinking. "None of us belong here, Jack," she said quietly. "That's the point. You're not supposed to understand. None of us ever do. All we can do is wait. Wait for what? Jack asked, a thread of anger creeping into his voice. His hands gripped the counter, knuckles white, his body trembling with frustration and fear. What the hell is this place? What do you want from me? You'll understand soon enough, the waitress replied, her voice taking on an odd finality. But it's too late now. The moment you stepped through that door, you became part of the cycle. Just like the rest of us. Just like the others. Before you. Jack's pulse hammered in his ears as he took a step back. He tried to force himself to think logically. There had to be a way out. He couldn't stay here. He wouldn't. His whole life had been spent on the road, running, moving. He had always been able to keep driving, to push on no matter what. He wasn't about to let some haunted rest stop, some twisted diner trap him. He couldn't. No, Jack said firmly, more to himself than to her. I won't stay here. I won't be like them. I'm not some ghost. The waitress just stood there, her still face unreadable, but there was a glint in her eyes, a knowing glint. I'm sorry, Jack, she said, and for the first time her voice seemed tinged with regret. But it's already done. The door is locked, the road is closed, and no one can get out once. They're inside. Jack's fingers scraped against the counter as he stumbled back toward the door. He tugged at it again, harder this time. The handle stuck. It wouldn't turn. His entire body was shaking, but he couldn't stop. His brain screamed at him to run, to fight, to escape. The jukebox played louder, the notes distorting as if they were getting closer, closing in. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the music cut out, leaving behind a silence that rang louder than anything else in the diner. Jack whipped around, his heart thudding in his chest. The patrons were staring at him now, every single one of them frozen in time. Their eyes were wide, faces twisted in silent screams, their expressions locked in a moment of fear that never went away. He was trapped. Please, Jack whispered, pleading with the empty room. Let me out. The waitress stepped toward him, reaching out a hand as if to comfort him. You're already part of it, Jack, she said. There's no way out. And in that moment, Jack knew. He wasn't just stuck in this diner. He wasn't just stuck in this place. The rest stop wasn't just an empty, forgotten stretch of road in the middle of nowhere. It was a prison. A prison built on time, on memories, on lost souls. And now, Jack was one of them. Jack's mind was a whirlwind, thoughts colliding like cars in a crash. The moment the waitress's words hit him, a cold, paralyzing fear washed over him like a tide he couldn't escape. He wasn't just lost on some back road. He wasn't stuck in a strange diner in the middle of nowhere. He was trapped in a place that defied time and reality with no way out. He had been here before, just like she said. He'd driven this road countless times, passed through countless towns, and never once had he questioned the quiet, the emptiness of the stretches between places. But now, this place wasn't just empty. It was alive in its own way, twisting the fabric of time into something unrecognizable. The diner, the whole rest stop, had never existed in the way he thought. It was something else entirely, a place suspended between worlds, between life and death, and Jack was now a part of it. Please, he pleaded again, his voice cracking. I just want to leave. The waitress, with that same unsettling smile, shook her head slowly, like a teacher trying to explain the inevitable to a child who refused to understand. I told you, Jack. It's too late now. The rest of the diner seemed to close in on him, the frozen faces of the patrons now feeling like 1,000 eyes were upon him, judging him, waiting for him to accept his fate. They all knew the truth. They had been here longer than him, longer than they ever should have been. And now it was his turn to join the endless loop, his turn to be stuck, locked in time, forever. But Jack couldn't accept that. He wouldn't. He had spent his whole life on the road, on the move, running from the mundane and the ordinary, chasing the freedom that came with the open highway. This place was the opposite of that. It was suffocating, a slow death that could only be survived if you let go. Jack wasn't ready to let go. With a sudden burst of defiance, He slammed his fist against the counter, the sound reverberating through the room like thunder. His breath came in ragged gasps, his entire body shaking with the adrenaline of resistance. "No!" he shouted. "I won't stay here. I'll break out. I'll find a way." The waitress didn't react, her frozen expression as passive as ever, but there was something in her eyes, something almost pitying, like she knew better than to argue. "You can't fight what's already here, Jack. You can't escape the cycle." Her voice was gentle, yet carried an unmistakable weight, as if she had said the same thing to countless others before him. "No one ever leaves." Jack spun toward the door again, this time determined to break it down, to fight whatever force was holding him in. His breath came in ragged gasps as he pounded on the door, slamming his shoulder against it. Over and over. His muscles burned with the effort. But nothing. The door wouldn't budge. It was as if the walls themselves had turned into stone, impervious to his strength, to his will. He backed away, gasping for air, his whole body trembling. This couldn't be happening. He was a trucker. He had faced worse things than this, had driven through storms, dealt with accidents, road closures, and every other hardship imaginable. But this was different. This wasn't something he could handle. This wasn't just the road. This was something he couldn't control. The jukebox started up again, the same eerie tune playing in a loop, the endless, distorted notes twisted in his mind, making him feel even more disconnected from reality. Jack felt like his whole world was unraveling. His vision blurred, the room spinning. The other patrons were still there, unmoving, but their faces seemed to shift in his peripheral vision. Their expressions seemed to change ever so slightly, as if they were waiting for something he had yet to understand. "Look at them, Jack." The waitress's voice was close now, almost a whisper in his ear. "They're waiting, and so are you." He turned to face her, a knot of fear tightening in his chest. "What do you want from me?" She tilted her head, her smile growing colder. "I don't want anything from you, Jack. I never did. I'm just here, just like you." He stepped back, his hand instinctively reaching for the door again. This time he pulled harder, twisting the knob with all his strength. But the door remained locked. He could feel the weight of the building closing in on him, could feel the force of something darker, more powerful than he was, bearing down on him. "You're stuck here," the waitress said, "just like the rest of us. But don't worry, we're all in the same place now." Jack felt the walls pressing against him, the diner folding in on itself, the dim light growing darker, colder. The faces of the other patrons, their eyes wide and unblinking, seemed to be watching him now. They were no longer just frozen. They were waiting. "What happens now?" Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Now," the waitress said, stepping back. "You join them. You'll stay with us. You'll become a part of the cycle." Jack's legs shook as he staggered backward. His heart pounded in his chest as the world around him seemed to blur and fade. The walls warped, and the floor felt like it was tilting under his feet. The air was heavy, suffocating. The jukebox music sounded distant now, but still loud, a constant presence in the background of his mind. "No!" Jack shouted again, but it was too late. The room shifted. The walls folded in on themselves, and the lights flickered one last time before going out completely, plunging him into darkness. The last thing Jack remembered was the feeling of his body being pulled away like a thread being yanked out of a tangled knot. Then there was nothing,